Basically what I'm going to do is show the last 11 years of my work as a photographer, spanning from when I started to take pictures in undergrad to present time. And I sequence everything chronologically, so it starts from 2002 until 2013. So this was the first picture that I made, and this was during a spring break vacation in South Carolina. And these were friends of mine who I went on this vacation with that were also photographers. So I just had my view camera and I set up the scene. You know, I put the girl in the corner, I kind of focused on her, and I just put the two people in the back and had them repeat this kind of gesture. So I was like stumbling, you know, trying to figure out how to actually do this. So I left this area for me blank on the other side, and it was really important for me to hide the cable release from the very start. So you can see it kind of in that shirt. I'm clenching it, it's a like cable release one. So I didn't necessarily want the viewer, I guess I was thinking of the viewer, to like come and know it's necessarily a self-portrait, have the cable like release in my hand. So I hid it and I made 3 or 4 pictures. But I got this idea to kind of go to this place and to photograph myself at the beach because I was so uncomfortable there. Like it was this big point of discomfort to be on the beach, like in a bathing suit, with a tank top on and a pair of shorts, like hiding myself at this place where, you know, everyone is in a bikini or everyone's in a bathing suit and no one's really paying any attention. But it was so uncomfortable for me that I wanted to make a picture of that to see how it would feel. And then a week went by or something like that, and I got the film back after the holiday. And I was shocked, like looking at the results, that I was able to kind of take this real world kind of moment and freeze it and have it mean something really, have it like transcend itself and be something really powerful, and to see myself in this way, like operating in society. And I'd never seen myself look this way before. I'd never had this kind of truth almost about myself. And this picture was in response to just like having the camera with me and like having it really close and just having it record what it saw. Like thinking of it almost as like this mirror in a way of representation, how I thought like this camera wouldn't lie. Like it would bring in all of my pores, all of my skin, all of the light and the hair, and there can be this direct kind of confrontation with myself, this kind of way of looking. And the easiest way for me to kind of start this process of self-examination and thinking about my place in society and how there was this kind of notion of not really understanding what my place in society was because of my size and because of what societal standards of beauty are, like in America, for instance, and probably universal as well. But having this kind of thinking of looking in pop culture, looking at magazines and, you know, watching movies, whatever it might be that influenced kind of my idea of myself in my work, or idea of myself in growing up, and never really being able to kind of talk about these issues or these kind of body image kind of fears that I had in a way. So the easiest way for me to enter it was to kind of look at myself with others, look at myself with this woman who was my like surrogate for the 2 years before I had started to photograph myself. So the way that working with this, where I wanted to like double her, you know, I wanted to use the mirror again in this way of doubling her kind of gesture of this like application of makeup in her like pink dress, and then this kind of blank stare that I'm giving to myself. But I had thought about this doubling of her as like the second look, like people looking at her twice, like this kind of aid of attention almost in a way. And there was always this question of like my identity. Being like of a larger woman, and this kind of identity of how I could never really have a voice because I was always like shielded from because of this kind of being embarrassed or being like naive almost in a way. And I would work in a way that I would go and scout, I guess, or drive by or bike different locations. And I would see things, and this particular place was called Maxwell Street, and it's a hot dog stand in Chicago. And I just saw the way that the light was rendered, you know, how it was like illuminating, and how I love the kind of tone of it. And I thought that there can be a picture made there. So I came back with my camera and a friend for this picture, and I made this photograph of like this kind of this exterior self, and being at this like diner or the stand and ordering, and the sense of like shame almost that I associated with like fast food or eating, and someone like kind of judging me almost in a way. And so this is still when I'm like in school and I'm just trying all these different things, and I came across, I was looking in the bookstore at Columbia when I was in school, and I came across this book. It was by this photographer, Laura Latinsky, and this was the cover of the book that I saw, and I just picked it up. I was really curious about what I saw within this one image. So I was looking at the photographs and looking at this kind of examination of love that she was depicting with these couples that she would photograph. And it was so striking to me in this way that she used the camera to kind of create a narrative within her scene, within her partner. She photographed herself with her partner and then other people. And the way she was able to kind of look at her vulnerability and like intimacy. And this is something that I was so kind of in awe of in a way, because I didn't know what intimacy was until like looking at this work. And I remember like this particular image, like looking at the book and thinking like, this was wrong. Like I shouldn't be looking at this. Like for my kind of sense of where I was and my place in the world at that point, it was almost like pornographic to me in a sense. And at this point, I've finished school. And I moved into this apartment in Chicago. And for the most part, most of the work until a certain point takes place all within this one interior space that we got. It was a 3-bedroom apartment, and I had 2 other roommates, and I just kind of used the apartment as this space. And this was one of the first pictures I made in there, where I wanted to discuss weight. Like I wanted to talk about size and scale, but I didn't necessarily know how to do it. And I made a lot of pictures that tried to communicate that failed because they were too obvious. So it was this way of trying to not make something more subtle and have the same kind of effect to it, where it didn't have to be numbers on a scale or something really kind of that I wanted to have it have a different kind of scale or sense of space. And I was really, this was the point of my life too, where I was questioning a lot and questioning myself and what my place was, being, I guess, 24, 25 at this point. And being alone and like wanting this kind of partnership or wanting to know what it felt like to have a boyfriend, but always coming home and like being by myself. And so I wanted to photograph that one night coming home, where it was a real genuine emotion that I was feeling. It wasn't something that I had constructed for the act of photographing, like the one at the kitchen table. This was more in this real kind of moment, coming home and really kind of this emotional state. Feeling when I made the picture. And speaking about this emptiness or loneliness of being without a boyfriend or without this partner, and creating that distance in the bed. So there's just like, you can see the kind of space of it, you can see the background, but using the light in such a way where it felt like it was bedside light. It wasn't something that was like overblown. So using light in an effective way to help aid in this kind of emotional mood or this emotional state of my head. And I made this image, and it took me a really long time to kind of accept it, almost in a way. I saw it on the context sheet, and I was drawn to it, but I let it sit in a box for a couple of years because it was too kind of hard for me to look at or too hard for me to show. I think it was just the kind of vulnerability that I felt with the description of the skin. But there was something that I really kind of was drawn to, was thinking about this kind of the beauty of like the towel that's draping on the skin versus the grotesque body that's behind this towel and how it's being masked by it. But the kind of the duality of the kind of rippling of the body and the skin and the flesh versus like the towel, how it has that same kind of effect, how it's draping down the body. And the kind of tone of the sheet or the towel and like the tone of the light in the room. Like I was drawn to it, but it was too hard for me to kind of look at almost in a way. I realized, for myself and within my work, and the first time ever in my life that I was able to start to like talk about myself, like this camera and this world that I created with my camera and this relationship that I created with this machine. It was the first time that I was able to start to articulate like my feelings of isolation and vulnerability. And in the past, if anything ever arose about my size or losing weight or anything, I would just break down and get really emotional, and I had to kind of create a distance from myself to be able to function almost in a way. So now this outlet into like my own private world was activated by just photographing and having this photographic visual language start to kind of have its own voice, where I didn't have to necessarily have the words, but now the camera aided that. And I'm realizing too, like everything about the setting that I described before with like, now I'm performing, or this performative self. I'm realizing now that like the way that I'm functioning within these spaces where it's very observational, like the camera's there, it's present, but for the most part it's just recording, and it's just looking at what's around it and looking at this character and myself. But my kind of interactions and my kind of gaze and whatnot is always fixated on something else that's in the room, that's not necessarily anything that maybe is that important or not, but it's just like this private kind of woman, this private kind of gesture or whatnot in this space. And then this particular image was very much so something I wanted to do with the other one that's very similar on the bed, the 4 a.m., the one that I spoke of before. But I couldn't make a picture like this at that time. Like I was too vulnerable, I was too kind of shy to ask someone to make this photograph with me. And then I asked a roommate of mine to kind of help me do this photograph, and he agreed to do so, because I just wanted to know what it felt like to have someone hold me. You know, I wanted to kind of understand in a way like the complexity of a relationship, or what it felt like just to have this simple gesture, the simple like hand over my body. And in all the photographs that I would make, I would control like to the finest detail, you know, the color of yellow, to the 3 salt and pepper shakers in the background, to the painting of the girl looking back at me, to putting up the drape in the background to clear out the space of the distance and what all the junk that was in the room. And the way that I was using light to kind of seduce. I was trying to like seduce someone, seduce the looker again, to look at this gesture, to look at this face, to kind of find beauty or find something almost sensual about what I was trying to communicate within my look. And like I was getting older, I was making changes in my life, but I was still like kind of alone. I was still like isolated in this kind of sense of not knowing what domesticity was, but creating a kind of certain sense of domesticity with myself within this space. And this was the last photograph I made before I moved to New Haven, where I went to grad school. And this is the only time, I mean, I was really close. Like the camera was really close to me in this picture. And I had never really made a photograph that had this sense of distance, really. I mean, the one buttoning up the pants, but that had my face in it, and this kind of bird's eye view almost down onto my flesh and into my cleavage, whatnot, and like looking for the sensual self that I was referring to. And so I was really kind of heightenedly thinking about this. And being in this new place, like being out of Chicago, understanding my sexuality in a different way, like almost like this fast track to understanding my sexuality, where I felt like entitled almost in a way, and this like sense of entitlement that I didn't feel before, not by like making this work, but just things that had happened and taking ownership almost for it in a way, like kind of attributed to this work as well. And I was exploring it in like this new world, and I was able to kind of have the camera be this access point to like these relationships with these men. So I continued the first year photographing with these men and photographing myself and doing some video work and being really frustrated by like, how do I take myself out of the picture and how do I move on to the next kind of level or the next kind of way of representing myself, or representing my voice as a photographer, shall I say. And there was a spring break, there was the year before my first and second year between grad school. I went on this road trip through the South, so Texas, New Orleans, all these different cities and states in the South of the States, and with some friends. And I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I just had this agenda just to photograph men, because I didn't want to put too many restrictions on it, but I was like, I'm just going to go and photograph men. So I went with these girls and we went on this trip, and I would just find people and photograph them and pretty straightforward kind of portraits of these men. And then I met this person, his name is Mike, and he lives in New Orleans, and I met him at a bar. And he was like really nice, and there was like flirtation with him at this night, and there was like an epic night out with like his friends and my friends, and it was, you know, really fun. And I was like, I developed this kind of crush on this person in this time frame. And so I wanted to go and photograph him the next day and like see what could happen. And so I would travel around and I would find these men to photograph, and I would just ask them if I could make a portrait of them, and they would sometimes have some questions for me, sometimes they wouldn't. I met this guy in a bar and I photographed him afterwards. And I was just interested in like simple kind of gestures that can communicate something that was sexual, like the mouth being open. And there's like you can't probably see it on the screen, but there's like this line of like spit that's in his mouth, and the smoke is kind of coming out. And I was interested in like driving by and asking these people in this kind of time that I would spend with them, like 5 minutes with this guy, 10 minutes or an hour with another person, and kind of shocked by the kind of what these men would kind of give me, and that I had this kind of power to do this in a way. Like I would go up to them and I would meter, like I use the light meter as this tool of like getting close and like touching and like looking at them in the eye and having like that moment. It was so important for me, and I would go back and do it a couple times just to kind of gauge their attention towards me, and be like flirting with them. And this is not how I would like be with men in the world. So it was only like the camera was like this act of, gave me this power, this like entitlement almost to be able to like approach these people and to like use the camera, this machine, as a way of interacting with the world. And similar to the way that I did with myself, but now like with this outside world, kind of aided in like having this kind of exclusive relationships within this time, this hour time frame. And wanting to kind of watch a couple. Like I think this photograph is definitely like influenced by Laura Latinsky again, like the bed or the couple pictures. But just like wanting to like see a couple rolling around in bed and being in that moment with them and like telling them to stop in a certain time, and having access and privilege again into like their private world and how they allowed me into these situations for like my curiosity of what a relationship was. And I think like all of the work is kind of based in this idea of a relationship with myself, relationship with the outside world, and relationship with men. Like the kind of, that's like the core maybe of my way of working as a photographer. And after school, I moved to New York at that point, and I was really lost as far as what to photograph. What was so great about being on these road trips and traveling and working while I was in school was that like I was in the South, and there was a definite like disconnection from the way that like beauty is perceived and body is perceived outside of like a city, outside of this kind of metropolitan area. And in the South, there's a different expectation. And so I felt like approaching someone in New York and a couple of people that I did, like I was really uncomfortable by it, and I wasn't necessarily that interested in photographing these people. There's something about having the freedom of travel and the freedom of being in these new places that really made me want to work with this kind of men. And so, you know, I had to think like, what's next in the work? And came to this point where I was invited to be in a show where it was like this accumulative show where every week there's 5 artists in the show, and every week they would give one picture. They'd send a digital file, and the gallerist would print it, and they would put it on the wall. And so it was for 3 months, and every week they would add to it. And then the end was the opening. And the kind of premise of the show was to give all the photographers in it like a digital device. Like I had my webcam on my computer, and others had like a digital camera, an iPhone, a video camera. And so I thought, okay, I'll photograph myself in my apartment. And I was making, you know, photo booth pictures, and they were horrible, and I hated the way they looked, and it killed me the way that it looked. And so I just had to think of something else. And I met this guy at an event in New York, and he's Canadian, and he was just on visiting. And then so I was kind of intrigued by him, and he emailed me later, and I just asked him if I could photograph him with my webcam for this project I was doing. And so he said yes, and I just did some like screen grabs of him while we were Skyping. But they were again like, how do I evolve this? How do I like do something else with this? That it's not just like this one kind of screen grab of this person. So I had this idea of like, oh, can I like do this doubling of us, like have this live feed of us together and kind of build this like web-based relationship? Can I like, will he do this with me, and will he give me 3 months of time? And I figured out a way of doing it as far as the technical aspect of the work. And so he said yes, and I wanted to see if I can kind of build this web-based relationship with this one person of what I imagine desire and love to be like over this time. But, you know, could this fantasy be real? Like, could this web-based relationship manifest into something else? These were like games and questions that I had for myself over this kind of 3-month period, where every week we would Skype like once or twice and make these moments. And some of it was like banal and like conversational, and others were like much more sexual, or the sexual aspect was implied by like a simple gesture of like lips being up or the closed eye, you know? This kind of role play of this lover of mine, like this kind of just for seeking pleasure, but totally like disconnected, you know? Like the pleasure is just for the camera, but it's like the relationship is, it fails, you know? It's like there's nothing that can ever, it's so disjointed almost in a way and disconnected. And then this was the last one that we made as the project was ending. And I wanted to take a picture of like waking up in the morning. And so we like set our alarms for the same time and woke up and like Skyped, and I made this picture. And I was curious, like, if this photograph could manifest itself in or this project can manifest itself into something else. Like, could it move on? Like, could this turn into love? Like, or is it only about loneliness and disconnection? And, you know, I wanted to continue the project, and I was like falling for this person in this kind of, yeah, I know, right? In this like removed way, because he was really nice, or whatever the case was. And so it ended, the project ended, he moved on, I moved on, I went on this trip right after, but I was definitely like longing for this person, and I had feelings for this person, and these feelings that I've never felt before. And I went on this trip just immediately after, and I think a lot of the work has to do with this kind of grieving, almost in a way, for this person that was never even true, but like fabricated. But it felt really tangible, and the relationship, however, felt tangible. And so I started to make pictures of what that felt like in a way. And I realized that I was looking at myself in a way that I was looking at myself in a way that was really familiar to me, or like a way that I would look at myself in the earlier work, like this mirror, and like projecting these questions again about my identity and kind of my sexuality and my place within society. And I hadn't really thought about this so vividly in some time. Maybe I was desaturated by it. You know, I kind of started to question like, well, what it would be like to be in a smaller body. And like, I don't want to wake up at like 40, let's say, and never know what it felt like to be someone smaller and exist in the world. And so, and I contemplated everything, and I had health insurance at the time, which is huge in the States. And so I had health insurance, and I decided to go and have this like lap band procedure, which is like this bariatric procedure where they basically just put a band on your stomach, and it just controls the amount that you can eat. And so it's like, it's weight loss surgery, basically. But there's no cutting and removing, it's just a silicone band that gets placed. And so I had this procedure done, and this was the first time that I looked at the scars, and I looked at like the bandages after I had had it. Oops. And so I'm photographing myself now in my apartment, and there had been a kind of time where I kind of had distance from looking at myself, and now I'm like back at it, you know, back at like looking at myself and trying to see as the body was changing. And I realized, you know, the weight kind of started coming off pretty quickly, and I was actually shocked by it, and I didn't necessarily know how to deal with it in a way, like emotionally and physically also. But I was photographing these things that were important, like this chair appears in a couple of other photographs. But now I fit in it differently, and that was kind of crazy to me. And so I wanted to make a photograph of how I fit now in this space. And then also capturing moments that were really important to me. Like, being under like 200 pounds for the first time in my adult life. And I feel like with this image too, I'm looking at myself so differently. Like I've never looked at myself in this way in the photographs. And this mirror, and this is my apartment that I'm currently in, as the weight was coming off, I would like look at myself, and like not in a vain way, but just in like a curious way, and just see the shape and see the kind of body changing. But it wasn't something I wanted to photograph. Like I didn't want to photograph like every week or every month or whatever it was. I wanted to have distance from myself with the camera. Like I was living in this world now, or living in a world that I hadn't necessarily known, dating and doing these things. And I didn't want the camera to kind of influence or impact this kind of experience that I was having, as before I would use the camera to have these experiences. So I was just photographing like these monumental moments, or the comfort of food, or the comfort of having this kind of satisfaction almost in a way. And like as my body was changing, and this kind of what was left, or what was the kind of residual on me because of years of being overweight, and as the texture of the skin and how it changed. And then eventually, like photographing myself with lovers, and looking at this relationship in these encounters or relationships or whatnot in a different way. And this photo, like all the pictures too, is similar to like the one at the kitchen table where, like, I saw this light at 6 in the morning, and I was like, I have to make a photograph here. And this was the person who I was dating, and so I like, woke him up at 6 o'clock and made this picture when the light was in such a way. Like it had to be made at this time. It had to be within like, having the blue kind of texture, the blue kind of out like I do so often in the work. So it's kind of repetitive style of photographing. Feeling really comfortable with someone, and like being in love for the first time, and like experiencing love with this person that I met, and wanting to photograph what that felt like. And again, like this way of looking at myself I wasn't familiar. Like I wasn't familiar with this face that I'm making with this person. And it was like, I was happy, and I was happy with this person, and this way of representing myself was completely different now. So there was like, this photograph where there's love, and then like as a relationship ended, then there was this photograph within that same space. However, like he's not in it anymore, but then this kind of easy gesture of like heartbreak almost in a way. And like looking at these gestures, like feeling this way, like looking at the floor, like, as women do maybe. I've observed it on the subway now. I'm like, I study it. As I study light, I study people's gestures, I guess, with the relationship, but that heartbreak, and wanting to make a picture that dealt with that, but not it be so tacky almost in a way, or a cliche. But that gesture felt really strong to me. And then I think this too is in response to that distance and to that like heartbreak and loneliness of this person not being in my life anymore. And this is the last photograph that I had made. And I like the way too how the camera is. Can you see it in there? I don't know if you can, but the camera also, there's a shadow of it that appears, So then there's like, its presence is in it too. Then the relationship kind of tied in as well. So that's all. Thank you.